With the help of Hashem, we are learning Shabbos Daf Chaf. We left off on Daf Yutes Amid Beis, 7 lines before the bottom of the Amid, beginning with the Mishnah. Again, we are continuing to learn regarding activities that one cannot do prior to Shabbos because the person might end up violating one of the malachas on Shabbos. Here we're speaking about the sugya of Shema Yechate B'Gechalim, that you might stoke the coals. You might manipulate, do something to the coals or to the fuel, which will be the violation of Havara, because you're going to increase the fire of the coals or of the flame themselves. We're going to learn cases in the Mishnah where we don't have any such fear. We're going to introduce today the concept of food is called cooked when it reaches the level of Kamaichel ben Drusoi. We're going to speak out the machlokes between Rashi and Rambam, between Rashba and the Rambam. These are the very familiar machlokes, which touches not only dinim of Bishul on Shabbos, but many other areas of halacha as well. We're going to touch a little bit upon Bishul Akum. From what point on are we not concerned with Bishul Akum? We're going to touch upon today the famous opinion of Hananya concerning Shehiyah. Shehiyah means leaving food on the fire that's uncovered. We're going to speak about the concept of covering the fire, how they did it in the times of Chazal, which is really the origin of the blech that we use today. The issue of rabbinically not being allowed to leave food on an uncovered fire is because Shema Yechate B'Gechalim. Hananya's famous shita is that when food is considered halachically cooked, then there is no need to cover the fire, only if you want to remove it and return it. That's something else with the other preconditions. That for sure, the fire has to be covered, and when you remove it, you have to have intention to return it. We the Alter Rebbe paskins, you have to hold on to the pot, not only to have your kavana, but if you just plan to leave it on the fire for 1 or 2 or 3 hours into Shabbos, or even for the next day, and then when you will remove it, you'll remove it. That is called shehiyah. We're going to learn a lot more about this in chapter 3 in Peter Kira, but we're going to touch upon these sugyas today as well. One of the scenarios the Mishnah gives regarding what one may not do before Shabbos, because you might yechata b'gechalim, is when you're lighting a fireplace. Like how much of the wood needs to be aflame, and it's not so simple. If very little bit of it is aflame, or just a little piece here and a little piece there, we all know that. Then you can't go into Shabbos that way, because it's possible that you will see the fire going out. A person might forget for a moment that it's Shabbos, and he might stoke the flames. You have to have roiv of the firewood already on fire, and we're going to have a lot of nuance of what is roiv. Is it the roiv of every single log? Is it the roiv of the general logs? Is it the roiv of its thickness? It's the roiv only of the circumference. We're going to have very interesting arguments. And God willing, we're going to conclude today the first chapter and begin Perek Beis of Shabbos, behemshech to what one may not do prior to Shabbos. So again, we began on the Mishnah Daf Yud Aleph. Chayit cannot go out with his kalim. Now we're speaking a lot about things that you have to do a little bit earlier than Shabbos. The food has to be cooked. I can only put it up if it's going to be Kamaichel ben Drusoi, cooked when Shabbos comes in. Now we're going to speak about candle lighting. Now, lighting candles is also done, obviously, prior to Shabbos. One of the Lamates Malachas is Havara. Actually, from the explicit prohibitions of Shabbos, you have Loisavaru Eish, B'chol Moish V'Seichem, and then you have, according to some, the issue of carrying, as we spoke out, and we'll speak a lot more about the Isur of Haitzah. But coming back over here to, we kindle a fire, we light candles, midrabanan, one of the 7 rabbinic laws prior to Shabbos, and it's connected to Einik Shabbos, to Kavod Shabbos, to Shalom Bias. We'll speak all that as we get into the Perek. So the Mishnah begins, Bameh Madlikin, Ubameh Einon Madlikin. Many people say these series of Mishnayos, and in the entry of Shabbos, same concept, what wicks may or may not be used, what fuel may or may not be used. All the same fear that if it's a wick that doesn't properly absorb and burn out the fire, if it's oil that's not easily absorbable, then maybe when Shabbos goes in and those candles will start flickering, in other words, oy gevalt, it's going out, a person accidentally might tilt, might manipulate the lamp, the candle, to make sure the fire continuously burns. And here again, that's a violation of Havara. You're not cooking. It's not about, there's nothing on top of the fire, but it's about the lamp, the candle itself. That will be the opening of the Pedic, and from there, already tomorrow, we're going to get into the sugya of Chanukah. But Chavre, let us start on Daf Yud Tes Amid Beis, again by the Mishnah, towards the end of the Amid, says the Mishnah. Ein soilin basar, you may not roast meat, nor batzel, nor an onion, nor a beitzer, nor an egg. These are different types of foods. Prior to Shabbos, why not? It's prior to Shabbos. Ella kedei sheyitzoilu mi'ba'od yoyim. Only if it's going to be halachically cooked still while it's Friday, prior to Shabbos. And that's even Beis Hillel. This has nothing to do with the issue of Shvisas Kalim. No, we don't say we paskin like Beis Hillel. Even on a rabbinic level, I'm not bothered by the fact that in my pot something is being cooked on Shabbos. I am bothered rabbinically with the fear that if the food is not yet cooked, as we'll see details in the Gemara, I might, when I walk by the flame, when I walk by the stovetop, when I walk by the oven, I might be machata, I might steer the coals or stoke the coals. Side of that affecting the food, just that in itself, the coals themselves making the fire go from little to big, I'm violating Havara on Shabbos. Another detail, we may not place bread in the oven. We had this in the beginning of the Masechta, right in Daf Gimel. Im chashecha, right close to nightfall. Again, we're not speaking about putting it on Shabbos, abadanat. But even prior, nor may we put some sort of cookie on top of coals. Same concept. In other words, we want for when Shabbos comes in, for the product to be halachically finished, completed. We want for there to be sufficient time for its surface to be crusted, right, to be brown, to be hardened while it is still day. And Rabbi Eliezer, the Tana Omer, that no, we need for the bottom surface to be crusted. The Gemara will clarify what is the top, what is the bottom. Is Rabbi Eliezer Mekel? We'll see Rabbi Eliezer is actually Machmer, and this will leave for the Gemara. Another din, second to last line. Mishnah is speaking about a scenario where Erev Pesach is Erev Shabbos. Now, Shchitas HaPesach is done Erev Pesach, that we all know. But the eating of the Korban Pesach is done on Pesach, that we also all know. Pesach cannot be eaten raw. Pesach cannot be eaten cooked. Explicit psukim, you have to have it roasted. Seder. So normally, when would you roast the Korban Pesach? On Pesach. But when Pesach is on Shabbos, so here you're gonna put the lamb. You're gonna put your Korban Pesach on top of the coals to roast it out of Shabbos. We are not now gonna say, "Ooh, you have to put it a little bit earlier to make sure that it is halachically roasted." Here we don't have that fear. You are allowed to put the Korban Pesach on the coals as long as it's not Shabbos, even if it's right before nightfall. Why are we not afraid by the Korban Pesach? Because since no one eats the Korban Pesach on their own, as we will learn a lot in the Masechtas Pesachim, you have to have a chabura. You know what the beauty of a chabura is? Says Rashi, the b'nei chabura zirizenheim. When you eat by yourself, when I'm in my home by my own, I might forget and accidentally stoke the coals. When I am doing something together with the group, b'nei chabura are zirizen. No one will take a shtickle and eat. And no, you have a whole group, and you have the menuyin. You have menuyin, you have to make kiddush. It's not so pashut over here. You try in your kitchen night of the Seder, maybe depends who you're married to, and chop a little piece to eat. 1 second. No, you got to make a Seder. Okay. Now, weiter. Another din, says the Mishnah, Uma'achizin es ho'ur b'maduras beis hamoiket, one of the chambers that was actually part in the Kodesh area of the Holy Temple. Part was not in the Kodesh area of the Holy Temple. It was a chamber that was called the fire hall. The purpose of the fire hall was many, including being that Kohanim needed to work barefoot, to have the 4 begadim, or the shmoine and nothing else. And now we're going to learn details that if there was anything interposing the bottom of their feet and the ritzpas or azora, their avoid is not good. It's cold during winter. So they had this room that was made that if they need to warm up, they can warm up. And in that room, at the center of the room, they'll do really 4 chambers, 4 sub-chambers in the Beis HaMoiked. Every now and then the Beis HaMoiked comes up. Now, you have to light the fire. As we'll see, normally kindling a fireplace before Shabbos has the same issue. Don't do it in a way where the fire is not properly burning. If you only lit a fire a little bit here and a little bit there, as many people here in LA, we have fireplaces. Sometimes the fire chaps in Yiddish, sometimes it doesn't. So normally you have to light it to the point, we'll see details, where the majority is burning. In the Beis HaMoiked, there is also no such need, because kohanim zrizin hein, and therefore, if the fire is not going to catch, people will let it get burnt out. It's going to be extinguished. We're not afraid that someone will accidentally light it because of the group. That's umachiz and Beis HaMoiked. You could ignite the fire in the Beis HaMoiked, even if it's only little bits and little pieces. You don't need to have the roiv. Unlike Daf Chav, will be gevul in any other fireplace on top of Daf Chav. Kedei shatei achois ha'ur berubai. You can light a fire. You can light a fireplace prior to Shabbos, but make sure that the fire is already in the roiv of the fire, in the majority. How do you define majority? We'll see a machlokes. Because if not, again, shami yachata b'gechalim. Rabbi Yehuda says a detail, ube pechamim, if it's not made out of logs of wood, if you have a pyre, if you have a fireplace, but what the fuel is coals, the advantage of a coal is that if any little piece of the coal is a flame, not only will it not go out, it's contagious. All the other coals are going to catch as well. So there's no need, there will never be a need to stoke it. In other words, a yid should be more like a coal and not like a piece of wood. You know, when you chop fire, you got to make sure, right? A chassid has to make a sviva. If not, you better really look at your own luggage. Something is wrong with you. Okay. Says the Gemara.
We just learned about Tamid Chachamim.
We just learned about Tamid Chachamim at the end of Chagiga. Correct. Okay. Says the Gemara Vikama. Vikama means, okay, I got the first din of the Mishnah. You can't put on fire. You can't put food on the fire unless it is cooked. Because if it's not cooked, then you might be machata b'gechalim. What's called cooked? So Amar Rabbi Lazar, Amar Rav Chevra, these are big statements. It has to be roasted. And by the way, it's not only roasted, it's roasted by roasting, it's cooked by cooking. It has to be readied. How much? Kemaichel ben dirusai. Ben dirusai, we don't even quote him by his name because he doesn't deserve for us to quote him by his name. He was a bandit. He was an armed robber who was always on the run. And because of his urgency or because of his balkaivanik, he never waited for his food to be fully readied. However, Rashi here writes that he would only have his food readied a third. The Rambam holds that it's a half. So whichever shita you're going to follow, prior to the food hitting that level of it being cooked or roasted, it's not called cooked or roasted. Reaching that level means it's ready. The fact that some people are able to eat it just a third or just a half, even though that you normally don't, for this, it's already considered cooked or roasted. Now, what happens if food reaches the level of Maichel ben Derusai? Let's speak about on Shabbos proper. Shabbos, we're not allowed to be mevashel. What happens if someone takes food that is already kamaichel ben Derusai, but it's not cooked or roasted or baked kol tzarchai? I'm not going to eat it this way. I want it for it to be medium rare or whatever, more prepared. So here, the Rashba holds that on a biblical level, you're not violating anything. Rabbinically, you're not allowed to do it. It's once it reaches the level of Kamaichel ben Derusai, biblically, it's like cooked. Now, I know that midrabanan, there's many issues. Then there's also a whole other topic called if there is bishul, achar bishul or not. But we're not getting into that. The Rambam is very machmir. The Rambam, forget about bishul, achar bishul. The Rambam says that mitzad echad, once the food reaches kamaichel ben derusai, for many halachas, it's considered cooked, or considered roasted, or considered baked. But as far as the isur on Shabbos proper is concerned, if food is only ready a half, let's go with the Rambam. It's already ready. It's ready 60%. but I want to bring it to 90%, or I want to bring it to 100%. That is called bishul mid'oraisa. This machlokas of the Rashba and the Rambam is very consequential. Okay, here we're using it in the opposite context. Here we're speaking about cooking something prior to Shabbos. So if you have to have it like the Rambam, it's interesting. Then the Rambam is being machmed because it has to be put a little bit earlier. It has to be done how much into Friday, how much away from Shabbos that it should hit the half. Only then are you allowed to leave it on the fire. Okay. Itmanami, in another context, Omar Abasi, Omar Rabbi Yechanan, Kol Shehu, Kameichel Ben Rusoi, that when food, guys, we're speaking about foods. We're not speaking about liquids. That's a whole different topic. We'll learn about that later. Liquids are considered cooked when they reach the level of yad soiledes boy, literally meaning if it's so hot that your hand will become scalded or burnt, or your stomach, or the hand of a baby, or the stomach of a baby. Rav Moshe says it's 110 Fahrenheit. You have people that are more, they're more lenient. They say, no, it's 120 Fahrenheit. It's more or less than that. That's a whole different topic. We're speaking about foods. So a food that hits the level of Kameichel Ben Rusoi, ein boy mishum bishul nachnim. Bishul nachnim, or what we call bishul akum, it's really bishul nachim. Nachim means a non-Jew. Akum means a idol worshiper. And because of the censor, many times we use the words idol worshipers for the locals not to feel that we're speaking about them, but we are. If someone is not Jewish, rabbinically, we may not eat food that they cooked. Now we have the two large heterim. This applies, number one, to foods that cannot be eaten raw, any food that could be eaten raw, or any liquid that could be consumed, not the yatzei ledes, like water, even if they were the ones that made the hot water, even if they were the ones, let's say, that cooked the tzibalach, you can eat it raw. You can have carrots. When it's raw, there is no bishul akum. The other big heter for bishul akum is any food that's not considered chashuv significant, meaning it's not brought on the table of kings. As time goes on and people are becoming more informal, many more foods are considered foods that are oila shulchan alachem halacha l'maisa nowadays versus 100 years ago. But again, if it's chashuv and it cannot be eaten raw and the guy cooks it, then rabbinically you may not eat it. You have to kasha your kalim rabbinically. So says the Gemara that if a food, all right, already hit Meichel Ben Rusoi, let me give you the case. Food is not Kameichel Ben Rusoi. Let's go with the Rambam. Food is not 50% cooked. And you took it off the fire. The Yid made it 40%. The Yid took it off and it's cold. It's not cooked. And now a goy puts it on the fire. The goy makes the fire and puts it on the fire. Bishul akum. And by the way, that's even according to us, the Ashkenazim, that we're very lenient in how much involvement do we need from a Yid. According to the Ramah, not according to the Machaber, according to the Ramah, you don't even need to have a Jew directly with the food, even if a Jew just lit the fire. But you need for that fire to be used. I'm giving a case where they brought the food up onto a certain level, but then the fire was put out, the food became cold. Now you're moving it completely with the goy. He lit the fire over the threshold of a Kameichel Ben Rusoi. That's a problem. Now, it's not so simple because even if the guy brought it from under 40% to 60%, what happens if now a Jew is involved? So that's discussed a lot over here. We're lenient. And by the way, we're lenient. We say that if a Yid is going to add any part to it, it's okay, even though it's a machlokes and Shulchan Aruch. This is very much connected to what we discussed above. Rambam and Rashba is their bishul after Meichel Ben Rusoi. So for Shabbos, it's a chamurdika question, because if there's bishul, you're violating bishul on Shabbos. B'negeya, the out of bishul akum, it's going to be a leniency, because if it's still considered cooking it, so then I add it to the cooking. But the point is, Kameichel Ben Rusoi will be a cutoff. Or in the reverse, if a Yid made it Kameichel Ben Rusoi, and now you took it off the fire, and the guy made a new fire and put it on, no bishul akum. Ein boy, that's what he's saying, bishul nachem, because it was already cooked by a Yid. And Tanya, final application of Meichel Ben Rusoi, this is for sure one of the most famous statements of Hananya. Okay, and many Rishonim, all the way in Shulchan Aruch, rely on Hananya. Rashi paskins like Hananya, Tosfos paskins like Hananya, not everyone. Hananya says, Kol shu kamaychel ben derusoi, once the food reaches the level of kamaychel ben derusoi prior to Shabbos, even without a blech, mutter lahashoisoi al gabi hakida, you are allowed to keep that pot of food on top of a stove. Even though the ashes, the fuel in the stove was not shoveled nor covered. Shoveling or covering the coals is the equivalent of what we now call a blech. Big machloikas, why would you have to shovel and cover also, not to stoke the coals? To remember that. However, Rashi adds here on Daf Chav that the shoveling or the covering of the ashes is that the way you make a heket is by diminishing the power of a fire. That's why many of the poskim who are machmir like Rashi, we don't have to. They say that tinfoil is not a good blech because it doesn't diminish the power of the fire like in a crock pot. Based on the Rashi here, he speaks about, the Rashi writes that it has to be lahafik choyma, it has to diminish the heat. We don't paskin like Rashi me'ikar adin, it's just to make a heker, so you have to cover the fire. So what happens if you're not covering the fire? So says Hananya, again, based on this concept, that once food reaches the level of kamaychel menderuso, it's called cooked, it's called roasted, it's called baked, you don't have to even put a blech on. Gewaldig. You don't even have to put a blech on because it's already cooked. So you're not going to stoke the coals, even though there's nothing to remind you. Let's go weiter.
Shoveling aspect?
Gerufa means either shoveling out. Shoveling out is because when they moved the fuel to the side, they didn't need that much heat. They only needed heat to maintain, not to cook it.
So it's like lessening the fire.
So that the fact is, they didn't have a blech then. So that also lowered the heat. And covering it with ashes will lower the heat. It's going to diminish the heat. So Rashi's medayik, it's not just about the reminder, but it's about lowering the heat. That's a whole different topic. I know that the Chazanish is machmer like this, but we don't accept it. Saying we are good by using tinfoil, by the crock pot, and many even of our blechs doesn't diminish the heat. I'm not a big maven, but some of them actually are conductors of heat. If it's very, very skinny, it can make it even hotter. Okay, weiter. So here we had a machloikas between the Chachamim and Rabbi Eliezer, how much of the bread has to be crusted, or what part of the bread needs to be crusted. Rabbi Eliezer says, it has to be the tachton, the bottom surface. You know what the challenge with the bottom surface is? Normally we know what's top and what's bottom before our l'chaim. But when it comes to putting things in the oven, it's not simple. Because the way they would bake things in the oven is that they would have this round oven, the fuel would be on the floor, and they would stick the bread on the walls or even on the top. So that which is facing the fire is bottom, but you can call that the top. Maybe the bottom is the part that's stuck on the oven wall, farthest from the fire. Let's first clarify that. So asks Gemara, but they asked in the yeshiva when Rabbi Eliezer is demanding for the bottom part to be crusted, tachtoin heich the gabe tanur, is it the one that's against the wall? The one that's against the wall, guys, the one that's against the wall takes the most time for it to get crusted because it's the farthest away from the fire. Demanding for that to be crusted means he's being machmer, has to reach that level. Or he means, no, tachtoin begashmi is the one that's facing down. The one that's facing down is the one that's the closest to the fire. And that gets crusted the quickest. So Tashamat says in a Braisa clearly that Rabbi Eliezer Oimer Kadeshi Yikremu Ponel Hamidu Bakim Betanur. The one, the tachton means the part of the bread that's touching the oven wall, which means the Tanakam is lenient. Rabbi Eliezer is machmer. Machmer meaning that it has to be put earlier on Friday, further away from Shabbos, because you need for it to be there until the point. Here in the oven, it's not about Michael Ben Rusoy, okay, good. By the oven, it's about the concept of the outer part of the product developing a crust, this brown, hard crust. And according to Rabbi Eliezer, even the part that's farthest away from the fire. Then the Mishnah went on to say that because of Bnei Chabura's reason, they were allowed to lower the lamb, right, or the goat, right, the Korban Pesach, into the fire. Now, this is really a direct contradiction with that which we learned yesterday, which is that when you put something in an oven And if they're to stoke the coals, you have to open up the oven door, so wind will be let in. Whenever you have tender meat, clearly, gadya, tender meat gets ruined with the wind draft. So there's no fear. So asks the Gemara, my Tama, why can you do dafka the Pesach? Because there's a bnei chaburas that is in hain. But why do we need that reason? And why should it be only connected to Pesach? It should be any type of gedi. Guys, a carbon Pesach is a young domesticated animal. But if not, you can't lower. It has to reach Kamaichel ben Rosoy. Farvaz. We just learned that Gadya, a kid, a very delicate meat, even if you did not seal the door to the oven or the door that leads you to the coals, Bain Sidik, whether it's sealed, Bain Loy Sidik, Shaper Dummy, because you're going to remember, don't open up the oven, you're going to ruin the meat. Answers the Gemara, Pashid. Over there, when do we say that a draft or wind will be harmful? Is mintach, when the meat that's in there is already cut up. Draft is bad. The carbon Pesach dafke, where's Edo Cohen? It was done, the whole animal was done together. And not only that, the few parts that they took out was on the side of the animal. It became a helmet, it became like a spear. It took him in the chumash. Here, loy mintach, if the animal is whole, wind will not ruin it. The only reason why you are allowed to do it is because it's the Pesach. And the Pesach, b'nei chabura is the reason. You are allowed to ignite a fire of the fireplace. Dafkan the Beis HaMoikat. Kohanim Zerizim. I want you to know that many people say Kohanim Zerizim and Ein Shvuz B'Mikdash are really the same. There's a whole topic about that. Because you can argue, the whole theory is a rabbinic. You might end up stoking the coals to make it burn. Is it because, like people say, what do you mean Kohanim Zerizim? Ein Shvuz B'Mikdash. Now, the truth is, we're going to learn at the end of Eruvin, Ein Shvuz B'Mikdash is not a hard and fast rule. There are many cases where we don't say Ein Shvuz B'Mikdash, especially if it's not directly connected to Avodah. The Beis HaMoikat fire is not directly connected to Avodah. Rashi writes, the principle, Rashi here, is because Pasha to keep a room warm. So when the Kohanim start their feast, get cold, they have where to walk into. That's a preliminary, but it's not Avodah. Okay, weiter. So anyway, says the Gemara, Rafuna begins to quote a pasuk where it appears, which is true, that in the temple you are allowed to kindle fires. The problem is, according to this understanding, if it's a rule that anywhere in the Beis HaMikdash you can make fire on Shabbos, then the Mishnah wouldn't speak about you are allowed to begin to light a fire before Shabbos, even though it's not fully aflame, even though it might go out. The Mishnah should have says, you can light the Beis HaMoiket on Shabbos. That will be the refutation of, well, let's begin. So Rafuna says in the pasuk, right in Vayakar, that loy sivaru eish b'chol ma'ishveiseichem. Don't kindle fire in your dwelling places. From where Medayik b'chol ma'ishveiseichem atam avayir. You are allowed to light a fire. That's the way that Rafuna learned the meduras Beis HaMoiket, even on Shabbos. So that's why we don't care if the pyre was lit only a little bit, a piece here and a piece there. Says the Gemara, Maskav Rab Chizda to the great Rafuna. If that's your understanding of our Mishnah, and not, I know that, so don't speak about it here. I mean, when you speak about the malachas, say that this malach is permitted in the Beis HaMikdash. And the Elo Amar Rab Chizda, no, I agree with your pasuk. Your pasuk is not about the Beis HaMikdash. Your pasuk is about altar. You know, not only karbonis that are brought on Shabbos, because the Torah says the words b'mayadoi. What about a carbon that was brought on Friday? But as we know, if the fats that have to be burned on the altar were not burned on the day of, it can be burned on the night after. You are allowed to do that. You're burning on Shabbos, and it's not even a Shabbos carbon, because b'chol ma'ishrei seichem, yes, in the Beis HaMikdash, but only on the altar. When it comes to the Beis HaMoiket, it's not connected to this. Yeah, you are allowed to burn the Evarim Epidarim, even though the Karbanis are not the B'moi Adoi on Shabbos, because it says B'chol Moishrei Seichem. And where are you allowed to kindle a fire on the Mizbeach? When it comes to the Beis HaMoiket, there is no such heter. You may not light the fire in the Beis HaMoiket on Shabbos. Why are we not worried that if you're going to light the fire only partially prior to Shabbos in the Beis HaMoiket, that people might stoke the coals b'shoigig because kohanim zedizin hein? Very good. But in the Gevula means in the boundaries. Gvulin means anywhere outside the holy temple. Kedei shetachos ha'ur berubai. What is ruban? Says Rav, roiv kol echad v'yechad. Every single log has to have roiv of it, a flame. Not the majority of the fire in the fireplace, which would allow, if there are 50 logs there, I don't know, 40 logs are on fire, 10 are b'chlal, not a flame, would be okay. No. Every single one has to have the roiv of every single one. Shmuel says, no. As long as the fire is lit so good in the pyre that there will not be a need for you to bring more, let's go kindling wood. Kindling wood is today what they would call a starter. Kindling wood then would be, the straw, the little holzalach that chop on fire quick. As long as it's caught enough that you won't have to add more kindling wood, that's called good. And normally that's roiv. By the way, many Rishonim say it's not really roiv. It's not really roiv. Sometimes if you have you have to know how to make a fire in a fireplace. Sometimes you know that even if it's the minority, but it's so well caught in this part, it will not go out. It's going to spread. That's Shmuel. That's the meaning of roiv. Tani Rab Chia l'sayol l'Shmuel. L'hoya Rab Chia didn't come after Shmuel. A braisa that was previously taught by Rab Chia says Ravina and Avashi, the compilers of the Gemara, that will be a backup to Shmuel. And the braisa that Rab Chia taught, where it says not roiv. There the words are words we're going to have in the next Pedic. Clearly, as long as the flame is already going up on its own, and because if you might need a davar achad, more wood, more kindling wood to make the pyre a flame, that is what the Mishnah says. Midrabanan, you may not go into Shabbos with such a minimally lit pyre because Shema Yechate, or here, the word is not Yechate, you might end up reigniting the pyre. Now, what happens if there's only one piece of wood, one log? So here again. So here, what do you say? Rav says, also l'chumra, roiv aviyoy. The fire already needs to penetrate the majority of its thickness, not only the circumference. Verstehst? Again, it's a chamur. If it didn't penetrate the majority of its thickness, it's not called a flame enough. However, of Amri law, other people say that what? Only beroiv hakefai. As long as the fire already caught, doesn't have to go into the depth of superficial, but the majority of the hekev, that's going to be enough. That's really the machlokes Rabbi and Rabbi Yosef. Oiker Harim or Sinai, I mean, same thing. If you have the roiv of the hekev, you have a superficial knowledge of the roiv. Are you a flame? According to the Amri law, yeah. According to the Rosh Yeshiva and Surah, Okay. Rav Papa, we got to put them both together. Same Rav Papa that says by Moedim the Rabbanan, right after all of the opinions, what you need to say. Or you have by Kiddush Levana, Hilkach Neimerinum, you got to say this, you got to say, same Rav Papa. Says Rav Papa, you got to do both. Got to be machmir. You need to have both Rav Avyoy and Ubeinu Noive Keifoi. Now we really have to start learning better. And actually, says the Gemara, that this question, whether roiv refers to the depth, to the thickness, or to the circumference, is really a machlokes tanoim. As we quote now a braisa, Rabbi Chia Amar Kedei sheyishaches ha'etz mimeleches ha'uman. Here we're speaking again about a fire that we can use in a fireplace. It's Erev Shabbos. How much of the wood already has to be aflame for us to say you can use it, you can leave it? If that wood is so aflame that it's ruined, a craftsman who needs a log will no longer use this log. That's only because the fire already penetrated the majority of its thickness. If the fire only went around the circumference, and I'm a craftsman, I want to build a bima, and I need wood, I don't care if the superficial part of the wood got fabrent, I'll shave that off and use the inside. No, it's clearly that when do we say the fire is already aflame if it's no longer going to be used by a uman, Gavaldik. However, Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseida says no, but more leniently. All you need is the circumference, but you have to have the majority, which means it should be already on both sides. If it's only on one side, right? If we're going to say the circle is 360, if one side means even 180 is still one side. It's not right. Once it's already on both sides, even though it's not in the depth. And where it says in Yecheskel, that its two ends has been consumed by the fire, and the inside of that wood has been parched. If that would happen, so interestingly, in this pasuk, you mentioned both about Shnei Kitzoisav, you speak about the fire consuming both sides, and V'toichei Nachar. And by the way, that might be again a siyua to Rav Papa. It says you need to have both. Speaking about fire, another pasuk concerning the burning of wood. This pasuk is a tragic story behind it. King Yehoiakim, who heard from Yirmiyahu through a Megillah, he got a letter that the temple is going to get destroyed. He dealt with it by burning up the letter. And as the pasuk records, that v'ha'ach lefanav mivoy eres, that the ach that was in front of him was being burnt. In other words, how did he burn up the letter? He used an ach. What's ach? Amarav achvena, a willow. And Shmuel Amar, no, not a willow. Eitzim shenilkadu ba'achveno. He took out a wood from a brotherhood of woods. What's a brotherhood of woods? A pyre, a group of wood. That's a flame. He took out from there a shtickle, and he burnt the that Megillah. Says the Gemara, Hahu da Amar Lahu. Once a person was in the market and he was asking, Man boy achvana, who wants to buy achvana? So we heard the word achvana. We wanted to know what it means. So we looked at the merchandise, and says the Gemara that ishtakach, that arvasa. We found that he was selling willows. From here you have a raya that achvana means a willow, as we had in the first opinion, and it's all the shitase. In other words, that according to Shmuel, burning means once you have a group and the group is a flame, that's called burning. According to Rav, like we said, it's not enough for the group to be a flame. That log has to be a flame. Okay. Amar Rafuna says, Rafuna, other details, Hetadim, where we are not afraid that you're going to gather the pieces of wood on Shabbos. If you have a pyre made out of konim, my friends, are reeds. Konim catch on fire very easily. They're very skinny. They're very dry. Veer, you don't need drive, because common sense, they're so flammable that even if just a little piece of it is on fire, it's all going to burn. But says Rafuna Agadon, if you bundle these reeds prior to Shabbos, what happens when you put something in a bundle? You make them more substantial. When you make them more substantial, then you have to go back to the rule of the Mishnah Roif. Same thing. Gan inim. There are certain pits, like date pits, when they are dry, they're great for fuel. They were used for fuel. They're very flammable. So here again, if they are loose, ain't tzrichim roif. But if nesanim b'chaysalos, if they are placed in a basket, and you're using that for fuel, the fact that they are gathered, it makes them less susceptible to the fire. And now you have to have the rule of the Mishnah Roif. That is what Rafuna says. Rav Chisda says, "Punkt fakert adraba ipcham estabra konim." If you have reeds that are not gathered, if they are loose, you know what? You know what happens? If a little wind blows, what will happen to the reeds? They'll get scattered. What happens when they get scattered is now the ones that are farther away will never catch fire. You might join them together. Mivaderon fakir. That is where you can argue, especially l'Rav. Don't forget, guys, Rafuna was a Talmud of Rav, that everyone has to be a flame. If Agadin, if they are gathered together, they're still reeds. They're very flammable. I would argue, even if a part of it caught fire, then you're good. And since it's not going to be blown away, then, and it's highly combustible, then you don't need drive. And I argue with the case of the pits. If it's garinim, if it's singular pits, they're not gathered in a basket. Here again, they might get scattered, mivadron, and since they might get scattered, we should make this gezeira midrabanan, the last line. If they are placed in a basket, they are still highly flammable. You don't need roi, faket. Now, any part of it will for sure spread to the rest. Is loy mevadron. So we have a machlokes between Afuna and Abchizda. And itmanami, we're going to have actually a third opinion that sides in one case with Rafuna and in the other case with Rav Chizda, turning to Rav Chafam at base. That's Rav Kahana. Omar Rav Kahana. When it comes to reeds, you'll see he's moida to Rafuna. Sha'ogdan. When they are bound together, that is when they need roiv. If they're now not bound together, loy tzrichim roiv. Like Rafuna, he's not concerned that they're going to be completely scattered. He's not concerned. That's a highly unlikely scenario. But when it comes to Garinen, here he will be he will side. He sides with Rab Chizda that tzrichim roiv. Fakert, if they are individual, then you have to have roiv. But if they are put in baskets, ain't tzrichim roiv, because even a little bit of them on fire will certainly spread to the rest. Says the Gemara Tani Rabbi Yosef. Continuing, hetadim, where a guy's fireplace was a very common thing. Today we have electric, we have gas. Like in the winter, everyone had a fireplace. So this is a very important halacha. Like what we are basically learning in the Mishnah practically is that if you forgot to light the fire, let's say it takes 30 minutes prior to Shabbos to hit Roiv. If I forgot in my house to do that 30 minutes prior, it's still 20 minutes prior. I'm going to be called on Shabbos. I'm saying we're looking for a tatum. So Otana Rabbi Yosef, that Arba Maduris, there are 4 types of pyres, right, that ain't tzrichim roiv. Because again, it's all about if fuel is so highly combustible, we don't need this whole takana is not relevant. No one is going to end up stoking anything on Shabbos. Number 1 is shel zephes. In other words, pitch, you don't burn pitch. Wood is soaked in pitch. Makes it very combustible. Or shel gafris, sulfurated wood, shlemis kretzing, and the shel gevina. I don't know what gevina means. So by the way, the Gross says it's not cheese. Gevina means cheese. So what people used to burn cheese. I don't know. People would soak their wood in cheese. I don't know. Wax. That I get. Wax that we use today. All candles. We're going to get soon in the next whole Pedic about wax candles. Let's see if we get there. It's 100% good for Shabbos. And the shel revav, grease. In other words, once you have this involved in the pyre, you're good to go. The masnisa tana, another afkash v'shel gevava, straw and stubble. By the way, straw and stubble is even more combustible than the reeds. So the question is, okay. Amar Rabbi Yechanan says, Rabbi Yechanan eitzim shel bavel, a Babylonian wood ain't tzrichim roiv. Babylonian woods don't need to have roiv. Again, they're highly combustible. Maskal Rabbi Yosef, Maihi, what are these Babylonian woods? If you're going to tell me, if you are referring to silte are some sort of thin strips of wood, that's not good. Because hashtop sila, when it comes to a wick, Omar Ula, Hamadlik, when you light a wick, we're going to learn this mamish now in the next Pedic. Sarech sheyadlik beroiv hayoytze. So when you have a candle, when you have a bowl of oil, so there's the wick that's in the wax, right? There's the wick that's in the oil. Then there's the wick that's yoytze. So how much of that wick has to be a flame? Not the tip. Roiv of the wick that is outside the fuel, because as we know this today, sometimes you'll light the wick and it dies. So if it comes to a wick that's more combustible than the strip of wood, you have to have roiv, silte miboya. That's not the meaning of Rabbi Yechanan. Elam Rabbi Yosef. Rabbi Yechanan is referring to what are Babylonian woods. Soicha da arza. Soicha da arza. Certain branches of a cedar tree that have some sort of woolly substance connected to it. That's mamish, highly combustible. If any part of it catches fire, all of it catches fire. And indeed, Rami Baraba Amar, it means something else. It means zaza. Zaza is some sort of moss, some dense green clumps that, again, they're very highly combustible. And I think the Chassidus here is that what Rabbi Yechanan is arguing, even though he lived in Eretz Yisrael, but we have back and forth. We had this in Brachas. Ultimately, they acknowledge the greatness of Yidden that lived in Bavel. And let's go the Eitz Hayeshva, Eitz Hamayim, maybe the Eitz is a tzaddik, that once you have a shtickle tzaddik in Bavel that catches a fire, everyone else will be affected positively from him. And maybe that's the inner meaning of this Gemara. And we say, Hadran Allah, Yitziyah Shabbos. We'll come back to you, Yitziyah Shabbos. And now let us start with the second chapter. It's amazing that aside of the opening regarding Choitza'ah, and as we learned Tarashi and the Tosfos, that it's Malachi Gerua, and that's why we're going to speak so many parakim about Choitza'ah. There's a Seder in Shabbos. Because we began, again, from Daf Yud Aleph, speaking about that which may not be done already Erev Shabbos. Then we went to Dinim that we're not talking about closer to Shabbos. Like how much prior to Shabbos does the food have to be put on the fire? And now we're still not in Shabbos, but we're getting even closer to Shabbos, and that is the mitzvah, the rabbanon of Hadlakas HaNeiros. Again, there's a concept of Oinig. The Karas al Shabbos Oinig is a Medivrei Kabbalah. Oinig means pleasure. Pleasure people have when they see what they're eating. There's a concept of Kavod Shabbos, honor of Shabbos. Honor, it's honorable to eat in a lit up room. It doesn't have to be very heavy lights, but not in dark. If there's darkness, there's a lack of Kavod. And then there's a concept of Shalom Bias. Shalom Bias, I know many people understand it to mean the peace between the husband and wife and the parents and the children and parents and their parents. Shalom Bias here, Chazal say, means that if it's going to be dark, Shema Yakoshel Bo'etz U'Be'evan. You might stub your toe on the corner of the table because you didn't see it, and you'll get into a bad mood, huh?
You're gonna blame your wife?
And you're gonna, okay, so Shlomo is saying that other people might blame their wives. I'm saying it's not about blaming the wife. I think when people are in a grouchy, grumpy mood, they can be the nicest to the wives. They down the whole environment in their homes. Don't be such a, be freilach, it's Shabbos Kodesh. So you to make sure that everything runs smoothly. So now the question is, and Chevra, we are focusing both, listen, on the wicks, and on the oil. And it's both for the same reason. If either of them don't burn properly, so when you light a candle, a lamp, and the fire is flickering, the observer will think, oh, it's about to go out. Minimally, they're going to tilt, they're going to manipulate the entire candle, the cup. And tilting the cup or the lamp will make the fire get better. And that is Havara. The Oiraisa. Or the Rabbanan, because you're not creating a fire, you're adding to the fire. We'll get into those details later. Okay, but you got to prevent from that happening. And first we begin with the wicks, and then we go with the fuel. Interestingly, Al Pi Chasidus, the wicks is the body, right? That's the Alter Rebbe quotes the whole time from the Yenuka. And the fuel is the Ruchnias. The fuel, the Ruchnias, is the Ovden Tovin that we do to make the neshama, that's the fire, stay connected to the wick, which is the body, through the Maisam Tovim. You're feeding it. You're keeping the Shechina together with you. So when we say Begashmius u'Beruchnius, Ukiyadua, the story that Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Barditchev told the Alter Rebbe, why didn't you say Beruchnius u'Begashmius? So the Alter Rebbe says, we know from Yaakov Avinu that first he asked for a Gashmius, and then the Shafti B'Sholem, then he asked for a Ruchnius. So the Barditchev tells the Alter Rebbe, by Yaakov Avinu, his Gashmius is like our Ruchnius. So he says, right, but his Ruchnius is even greater. So the say that is Begashmius u'Beruchnius, maybe that's the inner meaning, that first we deal with the wicks, and then we deal with the fuel. Tzemach is thinking, he's excited. Okay, says the Mishnah.
It's today's Tanya.
Today's Tanya, Shkoya, here we go.
The Psila and the Shemen.
Very good, yeah. So says the Mishnah, let's go with the wicks. Hey, Madlikin, this is so exciting because we're learning all these. Loi belechesh. Lechesh is cedar bast. Kavan is going to have a blast. Let's see who can go reading or him with the pictures. V'loi b'choisen means uncarded flax. V'loi b'cholach, cholach means floss silk. V'loi b'psilas ho'eden, nor with willow bast. Verstehst? V'loi b'psilas hamidbar, nor with desert fiber. V'loi b'yiroi kashal mayim, not with the moss that's growing on the water. Because all of these materials are not good wicks. They catch, but they don't catch. Now we're going to move on to fuel. V'loi b'zefes, not with pitch. V'loi b'shayva, nor with wax. Oy gewalt, not with wax. What does your wife, what does your mother, what does your daughter use? Let's see if we can get to the end. That this wax doesn't mean a candle. It means, in other words, the mile of a candle is that the wick is very long and it goes throughout the whole hardened wax. That's good. Here we're speaking about a scenario where there's a very thick cup that has wax in it with a very little wick. Verstehst? And Taka, you think about it, it's far away from the wax. That is where it might go out. It says the fuel is not easily absorbed because it's hard and it's far away from the fire. The beauty in our candles is that as it gets close to that area, the heat melts the wax. Look at you, and then it goes into the wick properly. Okay. Kick, nor with kick oil. No, Kavan picture for that. Good luck. Nor with oil that must be burnt. The Gemara is going to address what these are. Not with the fat of a sheep's tail. Can you imagine? That would use that for fuel. From any animal. Chalev is very hard. Again, these are materials that, again, they could burn, but they don't always go into the wick so easily. No. That you could use for Shabbos Kodesh. Chalev that was cooked. Chalev that was cooked, the big machlokes, does it mean it's now liquidy? Or even if it got rehardened, the fact that it was once cooked, many Yidishayim say it's already easier for it nachamal to be absorbed in the wicks. And the Chachamim, Oimrim, And obviously, they're not repeating the Tanakama. So again, the Gemara is going to give a nuance. Echad mavushal ve'echad she'ein mavushal. When it comes to chelav, never ein madlikin. Boy, again, we're going to come back to every part in the Gemara. Says the Gemara. Lechesh. What's lechesh? Oh, soicha da arzom. Cedar bast. Says the Gemara. No. Soicha da arzom means bark of a cedar tree. That can't be. You know what that can't be? Because guys, see, there's two types of candles. There's where you have a wick and fuel, and then a torch. A torch means you don't have fuel. The item itself is the wick and is the fuel. So if lechesh would mean bark, of course it's not good. And Shabbos candles are not lit with the torch. It's lit with really, Al Pi Chasidus, you have three components. You have the keli itself, which is very significant, but you have the fuel and you have the wick. Coming back to today's Tanya, right? To the concept of that a Yid is God's candle. How are we God's candle? So the fire is the Shechina. That's always shoyra on our heads if we don't chase it away. And how do we keep the fire of the Shechina again? So the body is the wick, and then I need fuel. The fuel is Avdan Tovin. And the Alter Rebbe is going on to explain, why don't we say the fuel is Torah? It would make sense if the fire is on the head. And Dafka, the whole point is, no, it's Dafka of them Tovim, Maisim Tovim, Tzedakah. The superiority of action over learning. Anyways, answers the Gemara, what does we mean by saying that Lechesh is Soicha da Arza, be Ranisa the Isbei? There's a certain woolly substance in the bark of the cedar. That woolly substance is not the fuel. That is Taka Chevra, like a wick. No, it's people would make out of it wicks, or you can use it as is and just add fuel to it, but it doesn't burn properly. That's why it's not good. Next, we said on carded flax. When you are going to be making flax, just to know how it works, when you're combing it, when you're making these fibers, you're going to have small, short, broken fibers. That's the meaning of no'itis. You understand? You're making cords, and then while you're making it, some of the material, falls to the side. People would go and use that, and they would make it into a wick. That is what you can't use. Amalei Abayim can't be that the word chaysin is no'idish al pishtan, because it says in a pasuk v'hoya ha-chaysin lino'itis. Is the charaya? You can read the parentheses that it's the chaysin became the no'itis. It's not the same thing. It means kitna the doik for linafitz. It means flax whose stems have been beaten, but the fibers were not yet combed. Point is, the oil doesn't burn through it well. We tied floor silk. Amar Shmuel, what's chalach? I asked all of these merchants that they went to all different countries, because sometimes if there is a word that no one is familiar with here, ask international travelers. They'll say, I know this word over there. I asked them, and the Omri, it's really to him, they told to Shmuel that kul chashemei. Again, it's a certain woolen substance that grows on the stones of sea. That's the way they understood the meaning of the word kolach. However, Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Zeiri says, no, it's gushkara, it's silk floss. Machlokes. Ravin and Abaya, they were once sitting in front of Rabban Nechemia, who is the brother of the Reish Galusa, and Chas Yud Havalavish Mitaksa. They saw that he was wearing garments from silk, regular silk. Kavan gave up with the pictures. Omar lay Ravin Labaya. When they saw the silk, it says, Ravin says that's kolach. That is silk. Amalei, no. Amalei, so Rabban Nechemia says, Anon Shiyara Piradna Korinalei. I don't call it regular silk. You know what I'm wearing? I'm wearing Piradna silk. I'm wearing cashmere wool. But they are both basically saying that it's silk. So that's siding more with Rabbi Yitzchak that says Gushkara, and not with Shmuel's coming back from the international travelers, connecting it to this kulcha, to these woolen substance in the sea. Meisvei, on the shita that says that it's silk, right? The last narrow line, it says in a braisa hashiroyim, garments from regular silk. Vahakolach, you see, kolach is whatever it is, it's not silk. And the hasirikin is corded silk. They are chayv and tzitzis. Point is that kolach is not shiroyim. How can you say it's silk? And that lechoida is a teyufta deravin. Teyufta, says the Gemara, I'll answer. Very weird. After teyufta, but we have it many times. Iboy say, not teyufta. Shira lechud, v'shiyara pardon lechud. Kolach is the fancy silk. Fakert. So that's why the Braisa calls it out with two different names. But it could mean silk. Next. Loy b'fsilas ho'idon. Eden bast. The swollen substance that grows, again, on the bark of the willow tree cannot be used. And again, achvina, it refers to the willow tree, which is exactly what we just had on Amud Aleph. Okay. Ravin v'Abaya. Nachamol. These two Amoraim have a Ka'azli. They were going the Paksa de Tamru Risa. They were going in the Tamru Risa Valley. Here in the San Gabriel Valley, right? Chazino, they saw Lahanu Arbasa. They saw willows. Hashgacha Pratis. Right? Kol hamafsik mimishnasi v'oimer mano. And Sadazeh Nirzu. Mafsik means you separate nature from God. Here, Fakir, they observed nature and they said, now I know the Mishnah. They connected their excursion with Torah. You see that tree? That's Ravan says, that's Adon Tanan. That is what we're talking about. So again, he looks at a tree and he tells them, what are you talking about? As we just explained, wood for sure is not kosher for candles. For candles of Shabbos, we want to have oil and a wick, not that the wood itself is bathed. So he says, Kolaf, he took a piece of the bark off that type of willow tree and he showed him that in the bark, you have amrinisa, you have this woolen substance. It's this woolen substance, the beini ubeni that's in between, that is the Mishnah talking about that you can't use. Let's go back. But not with desert fiber. What's desert fiber? Shivra. Now you know. Shivra is called nettle. Nettle is a certain type of grass that they would take tall grass and they would intertwine the grass and they would use it as a wig. The water, it refers to ukamta, the charitze, to green algae. The Mishnah has to tell you that green algae cannot be used for wicks. Of course not. It crumbles. Can't make a wick out of it. Papa, it's uchmasada arbe. It's the moss, the green that grows on the bottom of your yacht. First, on the bottom of your boat. That is something that doesn't crumble. You could make a wick, but it's not a good wick. Kind of we learned that in a Braisa they added other materials that are not good for wicks. A wick made out of tzemer. Or the shell seyar. No, it's woolen wicks, and here are disqualified. Now, why didn't our Tana mention these two disqualifications? Our Tana also agrees that they're not kosher. The Tana they done. No need, because tzemer michvatz kavitz, it curls up. Seyar it burns. It's so far away from it being used, it's so difficult to use it. The Mishnah felt it's not important to mention, you can't use it. Right. Then when the Mishnah goes on, Zephis is zifta, pitch. Shaiva means kirusa, wax. We learned in a Braisa regarding now when we speak of the pitch and the wax, Atkan, in the Mishnah until the pitch and the wax, we were speaking about psul psilois, the disqualified wicks. Ikan ve'elach, from Zephis and Shaiva, we begin speaking about psul shemanim, the disqualified oils. Asks the Gemara, why did I need the Braisa to say that? What pitch and wax, we know that they are oils, they're not wicks. Answers the Gemara, the Chiddush is Shaiva Yitzrechalei. The Mishnah here, the main Chiddush here is when we speak about wax, that Mao, the Tema, the Mishnah writes wax are not good. So one might erroneously think that lipsilois nami loy chazyam. Lipsilois means not as a wick. That wax cannot be used as a candle. Wax cannot be used, you might think so. So that's the Chiddush Komash Malon. That's what we just mentioned just a moment ago. What is the Mishnah speaking about? We put together Zephes and Shaiva. Why are we putting them together? You see, that's the Chiddush. This pitch, they would have a keli, very wide, and in middle of it, they would put a little wick. That is what's not allowed by the wax. But the candles that we have where the wick is long and the wax is not wide, it's relatively near the wick, we all know that is something that properly burns. Now, let me just say, there's something so ruchnius about the burning of a fire connected to Shabbos, because really, during the week, we are more connected to the Olam Hazeh. Shabbos is not only the time that we go away from this world, but al pi Hasidus, everything that we did during the week gets elevated. We elevate all of the avodah we did. Elevation means that we transform on Shabbos the Gashmias into Ruchnias. Machlal, when it comes to burning a fire, what happens? Where did the fuel go to? It was something tangible. Where is it now? I don't know, it became light. You transformed Gashmi into Ruchni. But even more significant, I know that many people use oil, and there's a beauty to that. But for the people that used hard, because what's more Gashmi? Liquid or solids? Solids. So when you take a solid and you burn it when Shabbos goes in, you are demonstrating how even the chamur, solid part of this world is getting elevated with the entrance of the holy day of Shabbos, to be continued.